Welcome to another episode of Fuel for Thought. I'm Grania Early, Director of Employee Experience Solutions at Fuel. And in this series, I sit down with the thought leaders who are shaping the future of employee experience. Today, I have the honour of speaking with Gina London, an Emmy-winning former CNN anchor, renowned leadership communications expert, and trusted advisor to Fortune 500 executives worldwide. With a career spanning media and corporate strategy, Gina has dedicated herself to helping leaders more positively connect and engage with their employees, their board, and themselves. With stories from boardrooms across 6 continents and practical tools you can apply immediately, this episode will challenge you to stop communicating by default and start leading by design. Join us as we dive into her phenomenal journey and discover how the ability to lead with clarity and confidence can shape the future of business and beyond. Gina, thank you so much for being here with us.
I'm absolutely happy to be here with you, Grania. This is great.
Oh, thank you. Why don't we kick off by you just telling us a little bit about you and the journey that you've been on?
Gosh, where to start? Well, the headline that I often get introduced as is former Emmy Award winning CNN anchor and correspondent. And now I'm the founder and CEO of Language of Leadership, which is a company that helps people, if they're emerging talent or they're senior leaders, take more control of how they impact themselves and others through purposeful communication. So, presentations, messaging, media, employee engagement, motivation for teams. But what I really love is that it's my own journey of how
Yeah.
I learned to think about what communications is. First, when I was a kid growing up in a small town in Indiana, was how do I present myself? How do I become a journalist? Because I saw journalism as my ticket out of the small town I grew up in,
Okay.
frankly. And then going and majoring in journalism and the writing skills of it and the positioning of storytelling and the hooks and getting all those elements is one. But then fortunately, I had an opportunity through hard work and connections and people giving me opportunities. But I ended up going from a writer or in news and in print to becoming a writer and then a producer and then an actual reporter in
Okay.
television. And that changed things because now you're not simply writing as the medium.
Yes.
Now you have to be someone who's camera ready and showing the
Big difference.
humanity of what's the story. Is it a serious story? Is there someone's died or there's a political scandal or something? Or
Yeah.
is it an uplifting story about like the Olympics? And how do you affect that speaking, that storytelling, the whole imagery? Now, I never thought about it as a transferable skill as
Okay.
I was
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
through the rigors of 24-hour news, but my journey of becoming a print and then an on-camera journalist after my career with CNN was over is okay, well, what do you do next?
Yeah, of course.
And I think when you have a dream and you achieve the dream, most of us, I certainly didn't myself, dream past the dream.
Yeah.
You know?
You're like, this is my peak.
Yeah.
Oh no,
Now
wait, I'm too
I'm
young to
still
pass.
alive.
Yeah.
What do I do now?
Yeah.
And so what happened was a friend of mine who had also been working at CNN, she had gone off and done a media consultancy in Washington, D.C. And so I was having an opportunity then with her to shadow her on some of these training programs that she was doing. And that let me see, wow, this is a transferable skill. And the
Yeah.
things that I learned are actually things that in a corporate setting, not everybody necessarily has been taught.
Yes.
And they are teachable. And I think that's something that a lot of people, they might have an MBA, they might be a subject matter expert in whatever there is in their field, but they've not actually had a moment to go back and think about and then repack with purpose. How do I communicate? Communicate
Yeah.
isn't just, well, here's a press release or here's our new policy, and now I'm going to go say it. What are the tools of me as a human being that I can more actively take control of to better tell that story or better connect with my employees
Yeah.
or whoever that audience is?
Yeah.
And that actually gets me excited because when you see that penny drop or that light bulb go off on someone
Yeah.
going, you mean this is for me? You mean it's not just someone's naturally a good presenter and naturally a good
Yeah.
leader? No, it's not just theory, it's practice and a lot of
Yeah.
the muscle memory stuff around how do I sound interested in a topic that I've talked about a lot
Yes.
is a skill. And it's not fake, but it is a skill. And learning how to commit mentally and then muscle memory physically
Yeah.
to it is something that part of the things that I help with other people so that they can have it for themselves and then they can impact others through those techniques.
I love that, and I love the idea of the transferable skills, because I think we can all relate to those moments where you're like, but this is the box I was put in. This is the box I'm supposed to be in. This is what my skill sets lends itself to. This is the job that I am supposed to have. And then, like you say, you have that moment of, but what's next? What else? And my skills only relate to that. But really, there's so many transferable skills, and there's so many different career paths that you can go on with your skill set.
Well, and one of the things, yes, absolutely. And one example, as you were speaking, that I was reminded of is years ago, because we're speaking here in Ireland, where I'm proud to say
Yeah.
I've lived for the last 10 years. I was early days working with an accountancy organization, and I was facilitating and emceeing the whole event. And the president of this organization, stereotype alert, was reading from his own little sheet, quite quiet as he was talking. I'm sure felt things emotionally, but it wasn't, he never probably experienced himself delivering in that way. Okay.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
now at the course of the conference, and I wasn't overly American jazz hands, my other stereotype alert, but I was bringing energy and I was bringing enthusiasm and I was bringing some engagement from the audience. And here's the moment at the end of the whole conference, Grania, he said, I'm going to take a page from Gina London. And he put that prepared remark sheet down
Love
and he
it.
just stood up and he closed that conference from his heart. And every single person in that audience, other accountants, other stereotypical, maybe more not accustomed to this kind of speaking people in the audience, it connected with them. They all stood up and gave him an ovation. And I will
Wow.
never forget that moment because it's
Yeah.
these kind of baby steps
Yeah.
of exploring the way I can communicate.
Yeah.
It's available for anyone,
Hmm.
no matter if you're in tech or finance or accountancy or whatever it is. Each of us can amplify ourselves, which is what I talk about.
Yeah.
You've all got a voice, but how much of it have we taken control of in order to bring that audience and connect better with that audience more successfully? And as a byproduct, we feel more invigorated as well. And that really gives me joy.
Yeah, and I think from a leadership perspective, he was probably thinking, this is what I need to communicate. This I need to get from X to Y, and how leaders are supposed to communicate is like this. I need to make sure I get my words right. But
Yes.
really, that wasn't inspiring anyone. The script wasn't going to be inspiring anyone. It was how he was going to bring that script
That's
across.
it, and it
Yeah.
sounds so obvious, I
Yeah.
think, as we're
Yeah.
talking about it, but it can be very difficult when you have spent a lot of time on slides, or you
Yeah.
spend a lot of time on your pitch deck, or you spend a lot of time on whatever it is that you are preparing, and all those words and that the flow and everything is
Yeah.
just so. And that perfectionist of a lot of leaders would be, it'd be difficult then for them to say, well, no, you don't have to commit it to memory. Know the gist,
Yeah.
know the essence. If there are some power phrases that you want to make sure you land or some campaign words that the
Yeah.
comms team says, you really have to
You got
say
to
it
do
this
it.
way, you can sprinkle those in.
Yeah.
But boy, if you can lean into your humanity and tell a story of why accountancy means something to you and the lives and the companies and the people that you're
Mm.
affecting, then now you've just brought the awareness of the words of the presentation to the real fact that you're that presentation.
Yeah.
If I could read the same script that that guy had, it wouldn't connect the same
Yeah.
way because it's not me. But if he starts talking about it and really brings himself to it, people are going to follow him and be inspired
Yeah.
by him even more than if he were just head down reading
Yeah.
every single word. And that I think is something that people might know intellectually, but until they have a safe space to try it,
Yeah.
it might actually be quite difficult. This whole idea that public speaking is the number one fear that people have,
Yeah.
there's a lot of truth to that because it's not a natural skill.
Hmm.
It is a developable skill. And little steps like just getting off script a little bit or getting off a few words at the beginning and a few words at the end. Baby steps are
Yeah.
important in this whole discussion of how to be a more transparent and inspirational and multiplier style of leader which is essential in today's workforce.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of leaders, you get to that space in your career because you've worked very hard, you have, climbed the career ladder, you're now suddenly in a place of leadership. I think it's something that is kind of forgotten that, oh, okay, now I'm in this position and now it's just expected of me that I'm able to now public speak and that I'm able to now get the exact right words. I may have got to that senior position in my company because I'm good at my job, but actually I may not be a great leader yet. I may not know how to lead a team in a verbal capacity or to inspire, and I think it's something that it's kind of overseen as if, oh yeah, of course they're at that level, they must be amazing at public speaking and amazing at, whereas I'm sure it's actually one of those areas that a lot of leaders really struggle with because it's expected of them, but nobody ever told them this was going to be part of the next role. Yeah.
100%. And you just touched on something that I think is really important to underscore. This is not just about presentations.
Yeah.
It's about the holistic approach to how you bring yourself to your leadership role. So it's not managing people, it's motivating people, it's
Mm,
empowering people, it's encouraging people.
yeah.
And that is all through communications. And I remember years ago, I was in Abu Dhabi at the bureau for CNN there for the Middle East. And the guy who had been the executive producer, so he was largely in production and content and the reportage of everything, was now becoming the whole like bureau chief. So he says to me, Gina, this people stuff is really hard shit.
Yeah.
And I went, yeah, it is. And so this is where you start to have to unpack who you are as you
Yeah.
bring yourself. Are you really abrupt? Are you really terse? Are you
Yeah.
paying attention? Are you asking people about themselves? And it's not just, well, I don't feel like it. Cultivating your
Mhm.
curiosity and first of all, your awareness that it's hard
Yeah.
is the key. The second one then is cultivating that curiosity about yourself. How do I do this? How do I become more interested? How do I become more inspiring? I think getting coaching is a
Yeah.
very important thing, or getting an advisor, or having someone that you can bounce off
Yeah.
externally about how you're thinking, because the higher you go up in a company, the lonelier it can be. And so
Absolutely.
sometimes you can't be just confiding everything that's in your head to everyone on your senior leadership team.
Yeah.
And that's where this whole idea of bring your whole self to work and be your authentic self, I think, is an oversimplification of
Mm,
what is actually required in leadership,
yeah.
because situationally, it might not be the right decision to overly share
Yeah.
about how you're feeling about everything all the time to everyone,
Yeah.
or be super authentic about what you're thinking to that. But there are some times when we need to be probably most times, when we need to be the best version of
Yeah.
ourselves. So, who are our confident, trusted advisors that
Yeah.
we can confide in, because you do need to have a place where you can offload and you can think and you can analyze, but it doesn't have to be with everybody all the time.
Yeah.
And so leadership and communications is about becoming more thoughtful, more purposeful, more judicious. It's not about
Mhm.
oversharing, it's about judiciously taking control and awareness and discipline around how do we hold ourselves? How do we speak to about the presentation
Yeah.
piece? Yes, but also how do we activate our listening skills? How do we facilitate meetings so that the quietest person in the room has an opportunity to speak
Mm,
and isn't overpowered by those domineering people that we all know who they are in the meetings, the
yeah.
ones who are going to always speak first? How do you get other points of view? And how do you still make decisions,
Yeah.
obviously? But there's a lot that goes into leadership that is not just the subject matter expertise that may have gotten you up the ladder. And like my friend in Abu Dhabi said, the people stuff is hard shit.
Yeah. There's a couple of things that were resonating with me there as you were talking, because I think on my own journey, I have fallen into some of those traps
Mm,
of what is expected of me as a leader and what kind of leader am I going to be. People talk about all these different leadership types and, oh, I'm supposed to be extremely authentic, but then if I give away too much, I cause the team mass panic, and you
right,
don't want
right.
that. You don't want that either. And people just expect you've got to this level, you should know how to handle, but a lot of it is trial and error. You're trying to figure out who you are as a leader, and you do want to, of course, bring your authentic self, but you do need to protect your team. And like you say, have those people that you can bounce off, that you trust, and show up in the right way. So I presume that's something that people are still struggling with because we've read all those books about what leadership type are you and what do you fit into? What box do you fit into as the type of leader? I'm sure there's lots of people that are still struggling with that and thinking they're supposed to be a certain way, but they want to be another way.
Absolutely. And first and foremost, we're all human. So, of
Yes.
course, we all make mistakes and we all have aspirations. And sometimes we get closer to them and sometimes we have moments. And I would say it's not even a day to day thing, it's a moment to moment thing where we're feeling, oh, I'm really connecting. Or then we think, oh, I'm over speaking. Or, oh, my temper got the best of me in that
Yeah.
one. But if you can recalibrate, be kind to yourself, but be committed to being a compassionate, caring,
Yes.
empowering leader. Those are the lasting, powerful
Yes.
legacies. There are plenty of leaders that are out there getting things done by fear and division
Mm.
and anger. But the research is very clear. Thankfully, history shows that's not a lasting legacy. It may have an impact
Yeah.
in the short term, and we don't need to touch on the political
Yes.
situations going on in a certain country I used to hail from that are a big indicator of
Yeah.
how not to lead
Yeah.
and not to have lasting lasting legacies where people are loyal to you. I mean, that
Yeah.
kind of leadership by right and leadership by intimidation is not lasting.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to your point then about, well, what's my gauge? What I like to encourage, and I don't get it right all the time, of course, but
Yeah.
if we can think about what I call the external awareness mindset, being aware of who's my audience, what's the situation. Sometimes the oversimplified little mantra is if you know the goal, you can try to assume that role.
Mhm.
Am I facilitating? Am I listening? Am I feeding back? What's the motivation of the other person? How can I find a mutually beneficial outcome? What are some of those?
Yeah.
What's my strategy? And then what are the tactics I can use? Assuming again that we're working toward a positive for both of
Yes.
us. That's the difference. We're not trying to arm wrestle here.
Yeah.
And then another thing to keep in mind too is this word authenticity we keep talking about.
Mm.
It can be overused and not understood. So the word authenticity and the definition that I like to focus on, it comes from psychology, which is authenticity is the degree to which a person's identified values, so it requires us to identify those values,
Yeah.
first of all, are consistently connected by their actions and their desired outcomes. And we presume again the
Okay.
desired
Yeah. Yeah.
outcomes are positive. So the degree to which a person's actions are consistent with their values and their desired
Yeah.
outcomes. And that little guardrail or that little mantra can serve you when your impulse might be
Mm.
to do X or your reaction might be Y, but the response should be so we can take a breath
Yes.
and we can recalibrate, or we can use some pause techniques to
Hmm.
say, I hear you. And like what you're doing essentially in some of these runway techniques or buying time techniques
Yeah.
is you're focusing against reaction and moving more into response. And that helps you to be a more lasting positive legacy leader
Yes.
as opposed to the knee jerk trigger. And then now you have to go back and rebuild that bridge
Backtrack.
that you
Yeah.
broke. Yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah. And I think the best tip anyone ever gave me was silence. And it sounds so simple, but I'm one of those people, as a lot of Irish people are. We talk a lot. We like to fill silences. We don't like the awkward silence. So, and someone, whether it's giving feedback as a leader or whether it's being in a meeting where, like that, you want the voices in the room who don't usually get heard to speak, even if you have the answer, you don't need to be the one. You can sit back and pause and listen and see how the room reacts. And like it's such a simple one, but I remember when it finally I had that kind of big moment of okay, silence. Just someone said chew on your M's, like your M&Ms. They were like like chew on your
I've
M's.
never heard that. I
Yeah.
like
It
that.
was
That's
like a
really
drama school thing they used to tell us so you don't say M on stage. And I used to bring it into my kind of thought process then when I was speaking with teams. I was like, okay, just chew on them for a minute. Don't jump in and see who else is going to jump in and bring the energy to the room. And, it's definitely something that has always stuck with me.
and whatever those types of memory devices are to help you in
Yeah.
the moment or help us in the moment to keep those essences of how we can communicate better. And communication, again, isn't always talking, it's a
Yeah.
lot of it is listening. And for example, the power of the pause, like you were just saying, my memory of that first when being told to me was when I was a kid. I played piano, and my piano teacher would remind me that the rests are as important as the notes, that
Yes,
the composer put them in for a
for a
reason.
reason.
And again, the rests, when you're a reporter, then you're often taught to not step over what the other person's going to say, your interview subject, because if you're quick to your next question, you might have not given them enough time to either complete their thought or to fill in and reveal something that could be really useful
Yeah,
in an
yeah,
interview. So the power of silence and the power of the pause are really important
yeah.
tools. And even trying to train yourself as a leader or I mean, we're all leaders, by
Yeah,
the way.
we are.
Let's
Yeah,
define leaders.
yeah,
Anybody who leads one person is a leader. So
yeah.
you're the leader of yourself. So we're all leaders. But one of the techniques of a leader, then, too, is to be not just thinking of what you want to say next, but also be thinking about how you want to bring that person you're speaking with out further. So, what's your follow up question? What's your, how did that make you feel?
Mm.
The wonderful acronym AWE, the awe question, which is, and what else?
Oh, I like that one.
When
And what
you
else?
when you can, I have to tip my hat to Michael Bungay
Yeah.
Senior, who's one of the best coaches in the world, and he has that in his book, The Coaching Habits, and we've had a number of interactions together, and I consider him definitely a wonderful peer. He uses that, and I love it to transfer to people when you're in a feedback session or you're talking to anyone, even a network situation, and they say something, something, my ski holiday, or something, something, my business, and you just simply say, and what else?
Mm.
It's amazing where people will go.
Yeah.
They sometimes in a feedback session, for example, they might tell you what they think you want to hear, and you simply say, and what else? It requires them, unless they dodge the question, but most won't.
Yeah.
If you ask that, it requires them to go somewhere else. You might get a second layer. You might get more information or just more sharing. It's always going to hopefully build the experience and build the rapport that you have with that person.
Yeah, because the instinct is to answer what is the polished answer that I should give in this moment when someone asks you a difficult question. So just that simplicity of and what else, and
Mhm.
it opens up the door to be like, I'm like, we don't need to finish there with that full stop that you've given me. I'm open to hearing more. That's a brilliant one. Like
Yeah,
it's
thank you.
simple and yeah,
And it presumes that there is more. And
yes,
there almost always is.
yeah,
I mean, you could even use and what else a couple of times until it's clear that you've run
yeah,
out.
yeah,
But it's fascinating to me, these
yeah.
kinds of question tools, these kinds of techniques we're talking about. You don't come out on this planet knowing this
Knowing,
stuff.
yeah,
And it isn't something typically that you just read and then absorb and then can apply. It takes out loud practice to start to have this become part of your new way of communicating.
yes,
Because we all are communicating, but most of us are communicating by default and patterns and programming that we've already had.
yeah,
And so becoming a purposeful communicator or a leader by positivity or our body language is connected to our voice, which is connected to our words, is a developable skill, but it takes time
mm,
and it takes outward muscle memory practice because you're not going to watch a video about it or even read a book about it and then go the next day and start to
yeah,
apply all this
yeah,
stuff. I think it's really important to have a coach who helps you role play it so you can actually
yeah.
hear
Live
yourself
it.
say
Yeah,
it, hear yourself respond differently, hear yourself come up with some of these tools that we might have discussed, but you've not actually tried. And even role playing it in a low stake situation like in a coaching
yeah,
session is still even a little bit different than when you try to do it for the first time in a higher stake situation
yes,
where the nerves are coming and you don't have that calm sense of I'm just doing this for pretend with my
yeah, yeah,
coach. But this is how we start to develop ourselves as more purposeful leaders. And there's no substitute for it. You can't chat GPT yourself
yeah,
in the real moment
yeah,
with some until we all have microchips deposited in
yeah.
our brains and we're just accessing the internet in real time, which I'm hopeful that I'm dead before that happens. Right now, it's still really important for us
Yeah.
as human beings to raise our awareness,
Mm,
take more responsibility, and begin to muscle memory some of these things into our
yeah.
new practice.
Yeah. And practice makes perfect. And like you
Well, or
say,
practice makes permanent. So that's
or yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Oh, I
because
like that.
because if you're practicing incorrectly
Yeah.
or you practicing in a way or you think that, oh, this is an effective way, and you
Yeah.
get feedback that it isn't, it takes some time to unpack
Undo it.
and to kind of retrain your brain and your muscle memory
Yeah.
around what it's going to feel like to try a different way. So
Yeah.
I certainly think it's important for anyone, myself included, to continue to get checkpoints and
Hmm.
check-ins and solicit feedback.
Yeah.
How am I doing on this? How did that feel when I said this? Have I asked you about this? Because we can get into practiced ruts
Yeah.
that aren't necessarily as impactful. And they might have worked in a previous setting, but the way we talk and the way we facilitate is ever evolving.
Yeah.
The rise of the discussion around neurodivergent thinking and neurodiversity in the workplace is also requiring leaders to not just think culturally diversity, but
Mhm.
also approaches and communication styles of diversity. And the leaders need to be the ones that are showing by example that they're open to adjusting their styles. That's why
Yeah.
when I don't have any problem with people getting baseline awarenesses through a DISC assessment or some other
Yeah.
psychosometric tool, but if it is used as a blanket to wrap yourself around to prevent yourself from developing,
Hmm.
that's inflexibility. That's fixed mindset. And that is probably not going to continue to serve you if your goal is to be a positive, lasting leader of positive legacy,
Yeah.
as if it were something where you said, okay, I understand this is my baseline.
Hmm.
And here's an area I'd like to focus on for the
Yeah.
next month. Here's a new area I'd like to focus on. You're not going to go, I'm magically
Yeah.
transforming myself tomorrow, but you can take on little components and step by step. It's a lifelong journey
Yeah.
because as long as you have breath and you're able to communicate, you're able to impact.
And it's ever evolving as well. And like,
Exactly.
interestingly, when you were saying about, oh, and what else, and about evolving and asking those questions, like, it kind of feels like that child, like, when a child is like, and then what, and then what,
Yeah.
and what, and what is that, and why, and why, and that curiosity of a child of wanting to know more, instead of, I think, as we grow and as we become adults and we become leaders and we become more senior in companies where you feel like you don't have the right to question things in the same way, and you kind of think, okay, I've asked this question, here is my answer, and things become a little bit more transactional. I think that idea of, and what else, and why, and what then, and what if, those questions and that curiosity, I think, can really lead to some great conversations in leadership settings as well.
And it can be counterintuitive, Grania, because sometimes I've had leaders say to me or people in higher up positions, but this takes too much time.
Yes.
I don't have time to ask a bunch of questions. I know the shortest distance between A and B, and I'm just going to tell them. And this is why it's important to remember that the empowering of employees, the engagement and identification of what's their genius, what's their innovation, helping them see themselves as contributors. In the longer run, it might take some more effort at the beginning,
Yeah.
but in the longer run, they're going to be more loyal. They're going to be feeling comfortable to collaborate and contribute.
Yeah.
And it will be more successful than ultimately for the bottom line. Let's face it, the research is the case study and the business
Yeah.
case around this is evidentiary in a way that also should support the shareholders and the stock
Hmm. Of
people and
course.
the board members and
Yeah.
all of that kind of too. It's not just, we're not just simply doing it for altruism's sake,
Yeah.
although it's a good news that kindness actually gets more bottom line. So isn't that great?
Yeah.
But there are plenty of leaders still. I've asked CEOs that I've done some work with. The first question usually is, what are your thoughts on culture? And I have had, thankfully, honest comments people say, which it's frustrating, but this is the honest comment is, well, collaboration might be nice, but dictatorship gets things done. And
Ooh,
that
that's a
kind of,
statement.
yeah, and I know exactly who said that.
Yeah.
That kind of mindset is going to get things done in the short term,
Yes.
but it is not going to
Yeah.
build people who are autonomous, who can trust, you can trust that they'll do
Yeah.
things when you're not there dictating.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't empower people. And especially in our hybrid working world, where the trust needs to be really very deeply forged.
Yeah.
Because if you've got employees who are remote working and you haven't created that mirror working thing, that dual mirror that they're doing now, where they're having an employee from one home working online with the other person simultaneously. So they're essentially keeping tracks of each
I
other.
haven't seen
Oh,
this.
that's a little trend
Oh,
that's going on now,
stop.
which is not making people
That is
feel empowered. No, it's
crazy.
making people feel like they're each
What?
other's big
Yeah.
brother.
Wow.
But when you are trying to do trust building in a
Yeah.
hybrid or a remote working situation, then you are trusting that it's not about the hours they're working, it's about the work that's getting
Done.
done.
Yeah.
And if you're encouraging them and celebrating their successes and letting them share their experiences, I mean, these things are essential to helping people feel engaged and valued and contributing, and not just some little minion that you're dictating
Yeah.
what needs to get done and micromanaging them to a degree where they don't feel proud of
Yeah.
themselves.
And I think we all have that responsibility to ensure that it doesn't go back to a dictatorship as well. I know I've had periods of work where I've worked under certain managers or certain directors, and their instinct is to go back to that. So they may be trying the collaboration side, they may be really trying hard to get out of their own way and try and learn a new skill and lead in a different manner. But like you say, when times get tough and there's a crunch, it goes back to this is how I need it, this is how I want it, this is, get it done. And it goes back to that dictatorship. So I'd say it is a difficult shift as well. And it has to be a mindset shift as well as, people working on themselves, obviously, to understand that that cannot have longevity in a business.
Absolutely. And one of the things too to keep in mind is that it does take time. If you've come from command and control style, which is what
Mm,
we're talking about in leadership, or your organization senior leadership team has members that are still like that, or most difficult of all is if your CEO has that.
mm,
Because if you're in a supportive role and you're trying to move middle management or part of the organization into a more speak up culture, collaborative culture, but your CEO is not buying that and embodying that,
mm,
there is going to be a real disconnect. And unfortunately, the toxicity from that person is going to penetrate. You can
yeah,
have as much culture workshops as you want, but if that CEO isn't attending them, or better yet, announcing them and
yeah,
championing them, the message is clear from the top.
yeah,
Always. And I've talked to plenty of people officers and other culture officers who are saying, we want it so badly, but
yeah,
the voice at the top isn't in alignment with us.
yeah,
And that is really tricky. And I think the only way to get that is either from the board or from other shareholders or maybe a senior leadership team intervention, but at what
yeah,
risk? Because depending on where those personalities are, it's a very tricky one to unlock that. If the log jam is at the top,
yeah,
it's very tricky. But yet it is, I think, a hopeful place that corporations, many of them, small businesses, are taking this leadership, employee engagement piece more seriously
yeah,
than what you're seeing in a lot of governments. What you're seeing, unfortunately, the tendencies for inward thinking, less diversity, more
yeah.
command and control. That, I think, is where we are at a bit of an inflection point on this.
Hmm.
So it is an opportunity for leaders who know this stuff in the positive way makes
Yeah,
lasting results to double down and not capitulate,
yeah,
to dig in and raise your hands. No, we are going to stand for diversity. We are going to talk about inclusion. We are going to talk about compassionate
yeah.
communications. And it's tricky because in a lot of communications that you see now, it's degraded
Mm,
to bullying and personal insults and jabs at each other and not collaborative style of communication. So the opportunity then is to really show yourself distinctly when you are convinced that these things matter. And I am. And it
yeah.
can be frustrating and sometimes disappointing. But this is the stuff that really works. Why can't we all do
I
this? So
know.
I think the collective opportunity for organizations who do believe in this is to do it with even more vigor and more outward show
Yeah.
than before.
And we need that link to have good culture in the workplace. You need the leadership buy in. You need the leadership to be living and breathing it. Like the two of those have to coexist together. Because, like you say, how jarring is it going to be if there's a whole team of people pushing for that, but then there's a leader that's ignoring what's in front of them and ignoring what we
And
need in terms of
and
culture.
there's enough research available that if you're working with an organization and you're an employee that has cultural tendencies or cultural mantras or cultural policies inside the workplace, but your senior leadership team is contributing to the political party of someone that is absolutely adverse to that,
Yeah,
or your organization is capitulating to some of those, oh, we can't do DEI anymore, and then suddenly all your DEI initiatives or your ERG groups are gone,
yeah,
that is alarming. Now, I don't have an answer as to what you can do if you're
no,
internal and you're not a big decision maker. I mean, I'd love to say in theory you can all band together,
I
like,
know.
yeah, and then you can lose your job. I mean, let's
Yeah,
be honest.
yeah,
But we really are in a situation where who's going to rise up and be counted?
yeah.
Who's going to stand for principle versus just power?
Hmm.
And this is not just how do we speak off of a script and speak from the heart at a presentation. How do we see what our senior leaders are investing in? How can we see where our shareholders are investing? How do we have organizations that don't just talk about corporate social responsibility? They actually
Actually do it.
really, really live it. And so the consistency thread of that, and more, I think, young people in particular, as they're coming up through their the ranks, the loyalty to stay with one organization, if it doesn't have the values that
Yeah,
align with them, people the trend is people will be leaving.
yeah,
So if you've got an organization, you see your turnover is going and going and going, and your attrition rate is really skyrocketing, then it's time to take an
yeah,
assessment and gut check around your senior leadership team. Are we expressing one thing but doing something differently?
yeah,
Where's that gap? How do we bridge it?
yeah.
I hope that there are more and more movement toward keeping that consistent,
Mm.
because that is really what is needed in today's world.
Yeah, 100%. And I couldn't agree more. And I feel like we've gone so into the conversation about what we should be as the best leaders that I'm probably totally missing out on the opportunity to talk to you about top tips for the people that are listening and things like
Oh
that.
yeah.
But I just loved how deep we were going
Yes, we were
into,
very
yeah.
profound. We were getting
But
very
I mean, but
philosophical.
you could
We're
feel
going
the
to change the
passion.
world.
Yeah, you could feel the passion though, because that is what we want our leaders to
Yeah.
be. We want them to be passionate. We want them to be authentic about what they believe in. We want them to be following their values. We want them to be inspiring in a natural way, which I suppose is everything we were kind of talking about. But then there's that other side of it, which is the performance
Yeah,
element. Let's
sure.
face it, the how they deliver messages, and we kind of started talking about that initially. Is there kind of anything before we kind of wrap up, but I haven't asked you, is there anything that you would kind of give as a top tip if there's someone out there who's maybe new to a leadership position and they're really struggling with their presence as a leader and that kind of element?
Yes, and I'm grateful that we went really macro
Yeah,
for the
I
whole
love
world,
it.
and
Yeah.
now we're going to go micro. And I was talking about this earlier in the
Yeah.
presentation that I gave about there's a lot out there in the world that we can't change that makes
Yeah.
that matters,
Yeah.
and there's a lot out there that we can take control of,
Yes.
but doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and focus on the things that do matter that we can control.
Yes.
And the first thing that I would encourage everyone is to be open to feedback.
Hmm.
So how do you raise your awareness about what your communication style is, if not from an assessment tool or something like that? Ask, hey, what are your
Yeah.
thoughts on this? First question, if you get a leadership opportunity, do a listening session. Say, I'm going to spend the first 2 weeks listening to my team members or my direct reports. I mean, that's already you're establishing that I've got an open door and I want to hear from you and I'm open to it. And
Yeah.
then don't be defensive. Say thanks. I appreciate that if
Yeah.
that's the least you can do. Start to categorize, what are my areas of impact that are positive? What are my areas that I can work on? I'm not saying things are weaknesses or anything, but we just want to try to start to create your own little personal
Yeah.
development program. And you don't have to tackle everything all at once, or else you will implode under the weight of a lot of the things, frankly. So get an assessment. Like anything, audit yourself,
Yes.
have others give you some feedback. Number two, then make some priorities and make them small.
Okay.
Like, do I have a tendency to speak over people? Do I have a tendency to bring my phone to every meeting. You know, these small
Mm,
ways of how we are sending a signal about are we valuing the person or not valuing the person should not be over focused on, but should not be not given a little bit of attention. So you can start to move things into the serving me or not serving me
yeah.
pile, or serving my team members or not serving my team members. But then little things though that I think are really important now just in the performativity of communications is your voice is your calling card. Your projection of when you're speaking and you sound energized about it, or you sound like you are just going through the motions. And we set the weather
Yes.
as a leader, whoever is holding that meeting or announcing that, welcome to this webinar, or good morning, everyone, welcome to the webinar. I mean, this makes a huge
Yeah.
difference. It doesn't mean you have to suddenly be Broadway jazz hands action figure,
Yeah.
but it does mean that for yourself, if you don't have energy for the subject matter, whatever it is, how can anyone else get enthusiastic about
Mhm.
it? So I think your voice is one of the first pieces of you that you can take some more active awareness and control of. And then the second component is your body language. Do you, if you're in an office, do you breeze by everybody on your way to your own desk? Do you say good morning to other people? These little things
Yes.
make a difference to people. Do they feel seen by you? I had one colleague who, or one client rather, the colleagues told me in the 360, he never looks at us as he's walking into his office. He tosses his keys on his secretary's desk because she has to go move his car or something. I don't even know
Yeah.
why. And then he shuts his door. And he was completely unaware of that because he's
Oblivious.
lost in his thought.
Yeah.
So there are little things that we
Yeah.
might do just out of habit that if we can only raise that awareness of it and then
Yeah.
take responsibility for it, we can disrupt it and it can have a real big
Mm.
impact. And people underestimate the power of changing even small things.
And those small things, it's just a 1%. It's just try to up your game that 1%
Power of
and try.
compounded interest.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for being here. I could have chatted all day, but I think we've got some great insights and it was just so lovely to have you with us, Gina. Thank you
Ronnie,
so
it's
much.
been my pleasure. I've really enjoyed this time.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Amazing.